When I was growing up, there was a film called Undisputed. I'm about to ruin the film for you, so get prepared. At the very end of the film, it's a boxing film, and two fighters have gone head to head in a prison situation. The champion who lost in the prison system, who was a champion outside of the prison, is a loser, but no one knows it. He's interviewed by people outside, and they will never know that he was defeated by a prison boxer. Okay. Why do I say this? To give you a picture of what happened last video. Last video was called Only Proof Cosmic Skeptic is Looking For. An actual proof, logical, mathematic proof of the existence of God. And I already had connections with people that interpretationally wise could not completely see what was going on, that the proof is definitive, and that there are outsiders looking in and asking questions that there's no reason to ask. But I predicted it in the last video. I made it clear the hardest thing about this is not the proof, but the accessibility. And that's what this video is about. So grab your coffee. Send this out to every atheist you know, theist if you're a theist, and also atheist. If you're interested, send it out to your atheist friends. We're about to get into it. Also, in the last video, I forgot to make it clear that the proof is ready in the description bar. So if you're going to take this seriously, you should print it out and follow along as we go along. For this proof is simple in comparison to many proofs, but it's not easy, nor would you think it have to be, given it's a proof of the existence of God. We're going to do this in sections. We're going to start with one thing that we have to know about this proof. Technically, that's false. It's a misnomer because this actually is not one singular proof. This is actually a collection of proofs that make up one proof with a conclusion. That's why the numerical notation is made in such a way, so that you can distinguish each proof as you go along. Because if this was just one long proof, it's impossible to study. But when it's a collection of different proofs, therefore you can study each one of them on their own. With that explanation set up, with the clarification marks given to you, we're going to start with postulate 1, 2, and 3. Everything hangs, depends, falls, dies on these postulates. Because this is a valid argument. They all come out of these postulates. And if these postulates are true, if they're truly, as I stated in the last video, logical axioms or logical facts, then it doesn't matter how you feel about it. It doesn't matter how you pray against it, atheist. The fact is, God is, nor can anyone call him a liar or me a liar for telling you the truth. So, let's stick with postulates. I'm going to read the postulates very quickly. Postulate 1, nothing is a negation of something. Postulate 2, that which is finite is limited. Postulate 3, if there is an entity X which produces for no reason outside itself, only because of itself, it is creative or decisional. Creative decisionality. Since I spent my time studying axioms, it should be obvious what's going on here. For me, but for you, I have to make a clarifying remark. How do we know when an axiom or a postulate is true? Definitively true. The way we know it's definitively true is actually just to take its opposite. To go ahead and show a contradiction, the impossibility of the opposite. Let me give you an example. Postulate 1. Nothing is the negation of something. If that is not true, just ask yourself a question. What would that mean? That means nothing and something could be the same thing at the same time. By definition, that's a contradiction. So therefore, postulate 1 is warranted, justified, a logical fact. Postulate 2, let's do the same thing. That which is finite is limited. If that is not true, let's just go ahead and ask the question. Can anything finite at the same time, in the same place, in the same way also be infinite? By definition, it's a logical contradiction. Notice what we're doing, showing the impossibility of the opposite. That's how you know, this is one of the ways you know that an axiom is an axiom. Postulate 3. This one we have to be careful with because it's the most grammatically dense, and therefore people can do two things: misinterpret it, and also, because of its complexity, assume that the statement or the postulate is false simply because of its complexity, its relative complexity. If there is an entity X which produces for no reason outside itself and only because of itself, it is creative or decisional. Okay, what will be the opposite of that? First, let's make one point. This is a conditional statement if there is an entity X. This is not saying such an entity X actually exists, though we have warrant to believe such entities exist. Notice something, because someone could easily come back to me and say, there's a good reason to believe there is no free will, no decision making, no nothing. Well, that doesn't matter. That doesn't negate deistic determinism. Calvinists are these. They're wrong, but that doesn't negate that position from a deistic point of view. It's a conditional. If this, then this. What will be the opposite of this? It will be this. That there is a particular thing or an entity which can decide and do, but its reasons are absolutely external to itself. Let's say it again. Notice the contradiction. You have an entity X that's decisional, but its reasons for acting or being the way it is completely given to it outside of itself. By definition, that said thing cannot make a decision. The decision is made for it. The impossibility of the opposite is what proves a postulate, an axiom, and a logical fact. Hope that's completely clear, because we're going to go further, but I want to say one more thing about Postulate 3. This. The degree of freedom a person has, or an individual has, is when it's not constrained by anything outside itself. So for you, viewer, to be more free, atheist or theist, is for you to make decisions that completely come from the truth in the matter, inside. Truth is objective, yes, but it must come here, or the decision is not freedom making. And that's why we become more like God if we, in fact, decide like Him. But let's go further. That was a short note. So now, as I said before, this is a collection of proofs. It's not technically one proof. Let's start with the first. And notice 1, 2, and 3, we're moving down to the 3 first premises after the postulates. All of them are proved by just one postulate, postulate 1. Nothing is a negation of something. What does that lead to? Well, premise 1, nothing can have no similarity to its opposite by definition. If it's a negation of something, if it's a negation of it, then it's negation of everything that is in its opposite. by 2, then nothing has no being. By definition, because if it had being, it would have something to it. By definition, it wouldn't be nothing anymore. Premise 3. If so, there is no such thing as a place of nothingness. Notice something. This is something that's very important. There are no such things as lacunas, vacuums, empty space. And this is something no scientist could ever prove by physics, but we've proved it by sheer logic and with mathematical certainty. Hold that in your mind, because people are going to always say to you, or philosophers will always bring to you this conception: why is there something rather than nothing? The fact is, there could never not be anything. So there is no place of nothingness, because if there was such, something and nothing can be the same thing. Only something has place. Nothingness cannot have that. So the word nothing is a linguistic confusion. That's the first proof. A proof that there is no such thing as empty space. For all you set theorists out there. Okay, we go to the next numerical notation. 1A, 2A, and 3A. And the first premise is going to prove by Postulate II, which says that which is finite is limited. That which is finite is not eternal. By definition, eternal has no limit in its existence. Infinitude, by definition, is limited. 2A, since there is no empty space, by 3, which we proved in the prior proof, then there is an eternal reality sans finite affairs, i.e., since finite affairs had at one point no existence by A1. Notice, we've already showed there can be no empty space, so therefore there is always going to be something. There are always going to be reality. But we also showed something by the prior premise in 1A, that finite things are limited, therefore they have no eternal reality. So when we describe here sans, for every one of you who does not know what that word means, it means without. The reason why it's used, philosophers use it, is because it's a non-tense term. It has no tense to it, time, temporality to it. It just actually means a negation. So if there is no finite affairs, no finite things, no limited things, all there is left is eternal. And therefore, we've already, actually, I'm skipping ahead. We're going to move over to 3A. Since there is no limit to this reality, by 1A and 2A, it is infinite. That's simply by 1A and 2A, where we show that the finite is not the eternal, and that in premise 2A, what is eternal is not finite affairs, because by definition they're limited. We come down and we realize that for something to be eternal, to be non-limited, means it has to be different and distinct from finitude. So therefore, having no limit, being by definition limitless, which should be obvious to anyone that understands eternal, the word eternal. Now we move down to the third proof, which is interesting because it's the one portion of proof that actually starts with its own axiom. Okay, the notation increases by 1 point, so it's going to be 4 points: 1B, 2B, 3B, 4B, instead of the last two being 3 points for their proofs. The first one, 1B, that which is perfect in value. Okay. Someone might ask or criticize by saying that it's loaded terminology. Here's a problem. I'm not using any special conception, nor any proof theorist is using any special conception of the word perfect. Any one of you can pick up a dictionary to find out that term or thesaurus. But I'll give you a free and easy definition, which no one can fight with. Free from fault, or free from flaw. That's all we need. And by definition, if it is perfect, then its value must be perfect also. Okay. 2b, the longer perfection can maintain its perfection, the greater the value. 3b, the greatest value is that which lasts without end, by 2b, a direct conclusion from 2b. 4b, by 1b, 2b, 3b, the eternal is the only perfect in value, because we've already demonstrated by 2b down, 1b down, that if it lasts, the longer it lasts, perfection mainly, then by definition the greater the value. And there's some defect in the reverse, and therefore it being eternal, so something existing eternally, is equal to that which is perfect in value, connecting us back to the eternal already. This is important. We have to understand what we've done in these three minor proofs. I say minor proofs because we already understand that this isn't just one proof. These are multiple proofs going on here to come to one conclusion. In the first section, we discovered that there could be no such thing as empty space. So therefore, there always had to be some reality. In the second proof, we discovered some interesting products about this said reality, that is eternal, that is infinite, and that if it's eternal, meaning lasting forever, by definition it's equal to that which is perfect in value. And let's rest on that for a moment, for just one moment, because there's one thing that should be added. When it says, someone might ask the question, even if there was a time or sans finite affairs, why not could there been other eternal things? Notice, no finite affairs exist. So by Postulate II, it's impossible for anything that we see that is finite, that may be finite, to exist by other finite things, by the definition of being limited. But someone might ask the question, why isn't there like a possibility of multiple gods? Well, it should be answered very simply and very easily. We answered it all the way back in the first proof. By premise 3, the first proof, if so, there is no such thing as a place of nothingness. That there are multiple eternities, multiple gods, and all the rest of it that cause all this stuff that we're talking about. Here's the issue. There would have to be empty space between them. So there's only one eternity. Now we go further. We come down to proposition 1. And proposition 1 is to reiterate what we've already discovered in the prior proofs. Before any finite affairs, this reality of perfection is. That's a conclusion we know, given all of 1, 2, 3, 4 B's in that numerical notation. That's just a simple conclusion of what we get out of there. So that should be obvious. Proposition 2. Finite affairs cannot make themselves, since they would have to be prior to their existence. Contradiction. Obviously so. Cannot make themselves. Proposition 3. Then this eternal perfection brought forth into existence finite affairs. since they can't create themselves. Therefore, the only other choice is the eternal perfection. Proposition 4, by the prior P, 2 and 3, it is clear nothing temporal or finite outside this eternally perfect being made it act, which means by P3 that this act is from a creative and decisional being. This is critical decisionality. Okay? There was no reason for this being we now call God to act or do except internal to the being itself. And that's why this is what we mean by God, and that which needed to be demonstrated is now done, QED. What you don't want to do when you see a sophisticated proof of the existence of God to say silly things like, this is a thought experiment, it can't prove anything. No. The conclusion is a logical necessity if all the premises are true. And here's the problem, and here's a challenge to every atheist and skeptical theist or agnostic or whoever that you claim yourself to be who watches this film. Forgive me, not film, but video. Find the premise which is false, because it's a valid argument. Everything follows from the premises beforehand. You can't do it with the postulates because, first of all, at least two of them are just self-evident. And the third one is by definition the case, because for something to be decisional, for it to be an act from a decision, it means it must have reasons internal to itself. Internal reasons. If the reasons for deciding are externally wrought or got, are garnered, that negates decisionality. We're talking, that would be akin to a computer that we make or a building that we build. If something is doing something that's highly complex, but its explanation for why it's doing such a thing can actually be aimed outside of itself. It can't be with premises 1, 2, 3 because they're just obvious. Something and nothing can have nothing to do with each other by definition. Forgive if that's a pun, I'm not even sure if that's a pun, but they're negations. So therefore, a place of nothingness, though it might be a good metaphor, a philosophic metaphor, does not actually retains or obtains or exists or is warranted to speak in any type of truth value. It's linguistic confusion. It can't be notations 1A, 2A, 3A, because by definition, finite and the eternal are not the same thing, because the eternal is not limited, but the finite by definition is. It would be a contradiction in terms, and it's justified by Postulate II. We come down to annotations of 1, 2, 3, 4B, and it makes clear, although this is the one area that has its own axiom set, meaning it has its own logical facts set at the beginning of the proof. It's not based on the postulate above, the 3 postulates above. It's based on its own proof on the first one, notice. And the first one is just obvious. That which is perfect in value. If you say something is perfect, but something about it is not perfect, imperfect, by definition, the said thing you're speaking about is by definition not perfect. Because the subset of that thing, whatever that be, is imperfect. So it must, by logical necessity, be perfect in value. And then the sequence goes on. So you get an eternal, an infinite, a perfect, and also, by the end of it, a being that is actually bringing into existence us who be finite. The saddest thing about proof theory and anything elegant, even creating beautiful poems, every artist knows this. It takes a certain type of eye. But any one of you can understand this proof. I'm not using any language that's foreign to you except maybe sans. And you can easily look it up in the dictionary. Finite affairs is the only philosophical phrase used. It comes from what we call state of affairs. So it's a restatement of that. But it should be obvious what that means. It means any collection of finite things. And then we get to the point where to go against the premise is to go against rationality. So I'm gonna leave this for everyone to really let it sink in. The challenge is still set. Find either the postulates or any one of the proofs false. Find one premise false and you destroy the argument. But if you don't, and if you can't, then you don't, and you can't. And the conclusion still follows. I'm gonna let that sit. Remember, the proof is in the box below. Forgive me for being a little tired. I'll enjoy answer your queries down below. God bless you. Come back home. The Lord is waiting.